Thank you. Really lovely to meet you all on Zoom, even if I can't see you all. My name is Subramanium. Can you hear me clearly? Am I loud enough? Great, thank you. So firstly, thanks for inviting me to talk to you all and to share my kind of practice and my research and the kind of work we do. I am a South Asian dance artist, so I work with a dance form personally. I will write it in the chat. It's called Bharatanatyam. And it's a dance form from the south of India. But I now run an organization called Academy, and our work is to take South Asian dance to all aspects of life. So we take dance to hospitals to work with patients. We take dance to care homes for people with dementia, for older adults. We take South Asian dance to schools for children with special needs. We also make dance, we program dance, and our primary work, our aim with our work is to support dance artists in the UK who work with South Asian dance forms. That's the work that we do as an organization called Academy. But what I wanted to talk to you a little bit about is I've been making work in the UK for about 25 years, and all of my work comes from a place of research. And I'm not an academic, so I'm not researching in a university. So when I talk about research, I talk about research as an artist, what inspires me, how I take that inspiration, whether it's something I have seen, I have heard, I have lived experience of something. How do I take all of that? And then how do I allow that to allow me to make work, make dance work? So the dance work that I make isn't classical or traditional Indian dance. It is contemporary work. So in the same way that some of you might use contemporary dance or ballet or tap or jazz as a form of dance form, I use South Asian dance forms as a starting point, but the way in which I make the work is very contemporary. So I use sort of contemporary methodologies to create work. So hopefully you might find some of the things that I'm saying relevant or makes sense to your own practice. This is what I hope. So what I wanted to share with you is just some of the things that has inspired me to make work, how that has enabled me to make work that then goes on and tours, sometimes in small scale, sometimes in really big scale work. So I'm going to share my screen and I can show you what I'm talking about. So can you all see that? So I'm going to start with really pretty pictures. So one of the things that I do a lot of work in, and the thing that inspires me a lot, is issues around climate change. So all of the work that we do with my organization, Academy, and a lot of the work that I've been doing for the last sort of 20 years has been inspired by works around climate change, around sustainability, but a lot of the work for me is inspired by science. Our relationship with nature, our relationship with science, and I do a lot of work with scientists. And sometimes I tend to go and be an artist in residence at a university where I work with scientists, I share my practice. So one of the things is I showed this really pretty picture because I've been really fortunate, really lucky to be part of a project called Cape Farewell. And what that project did 20 years ago when it started was bring together artists and scientists, put them in a boat and took them out to the Arctic. So this is in Svalbard in Norway. And the idea of the project was for artists and scientists to come together to look at each other's work and practice through each other's lenses. So for artists to see what scientists were doing, to be part of that real science. So in that case, the research was very much doing the science. So we did some of the science that the scientists were doing. So we were measuring temperature of the water, We were looking at the little organisms in the sea, like plankton. So we did a lot of that work in the Arctic, and that was partly the research and understanding some of the science. So this is the boat that we were in. It's a wooden ship. It used to be an old light ship, and we were in this boat and we traveled through these kind of landscapes. We did science. We had artists. We had visual artists. We had filmmakers. We had painters. We had musicians. We had all sorts of artists on the boat, but we also had scientists. And every day we would go out into different bits of the landscape, understand some of the science, understand the risk these landscapes were under. So some of those glaciers behind that boat, we saw some of those actually carving off into the water. We saw some of the kind of issues around climate. And, you know, there is something, I show this picture because one of the experiences we had was going somewhere so cold. And because I'm quite dark skinned, for some of you, this is quite normal. But for me, this was really, really a lived in experience of being very, very cold, where my eyelashes and the insides of my nostrils, the hair were freezing. And for somebody like me, I was born in Malaysia, where it was 30 degrees heat all the time. And then suddenly I found myself in this place where my body was reacting in a way that I hadn't felt before. So for me, that is research, you know, that lived in experience of how I felt feeds into the work that I create. That physiological response of being in a place is really important to me. Another thing was also sharing the research that I do, because so one of the other things I do is also that I'm a science teacher. So I teach science to children aged between 11 and 18, and I have done that for over 20 years in this country. And a lot of what I teach is also partly, in a way, research for me, because I think about if I'm trying to communicate something that is quite science heavy and scientific, actually trying to communicate that to young people is one way of me trying to understand how I would then communicate it as a dance artist. There is something about the way in which I speak and explain stuff and bring it down to a level that I understand. So part of the trip that we went on, we took young people up to the same place that we went to, gave them the same experience. So we had scientists and artists on the boat. We got these young people are actually measuring the glacial melt. And that research and that data they were measuring went into a research paper. So the young people were given the same experience. And how they think about the world, their interpretation of all of that, to me, helped me understand what I was learning through all of this, being there, understanding the science, understanding it through the eyes of the young people we were working with as well. And it's also that, you know, the kind of art that the young people there were creating, I found hugely inspiring for me. You know, and they created these beautiful structures out of sea ice, and it was what they wanted to do. It was really important for them to think about this, because they felt that they could see the world through this kind of ice and leaving a shape in the landscape. As it happens, just after we did that, one of those glaciers carved off, and literally it got washed off because of the waves created by big lumps of ice falling into the sea. So that was an example of something that didn't last very long. This is something else that young people made. They talked about the fact that actually a lot of what happens in the world they feel was in their hands and in their voices and what they said, what they did. So they picked up a load of seaweed and created this. These were the things that inspired me when I was making work. It was the kind of the landscape and the relationship we have with our land and with the space we live in, what that is, what that was, the earth that we walk on, the history. And because I work with South Asian dance, I got the young people to do this little dance movement in that space in Svalbard as a way of, it's the way that we in our dance form show respect to a place that we are in and that we're dancing in. Another part of thinking about research for me is it's people. People's experiences of life, where they live, how they live. All of this was hugely important to me when I was thinking about the work I wanted to create. So this is in Greenland. We went to go and speak to small communities of people. We spent time with the children. We spent time with the elders of the community, trying to understand how they understand their land and how it's shifting and how they don't understand it as much as they used to. So like I was saying, the other thing that I found on that very first voyage was that this is a sound artist called Max Eastley. And what he did was he put hydrophones into the water and recorded the sounds of seals, walruses, lots of different wildlife. And then he would sometimes play it on the boat for us artists to listen to. And he would literally record it and then he would just play it. So we'd all be having dinner in the boat and suddenly you'd hear the sound of these bearded seals and walruses and stuff. And he would just put a speaker up and play it to us. Sometimes the seals would swim up to the boat because they'd hear the sound. But it inspired me to create a dance film. And I created the movement on this boat itself. So the idea literally came from the sound of the seals that they were making in the recordings. So he played it and I had this improvised a small piece of movement on the boat itself. So it was very immediate. But sometimes, when we talk about research and how the information sits in our bodies and how we create work, sometimes it's quite quick, it's immediate. And for me at that moment, I really wanted to make a piece of movement around the sounds of the bearded seals. And then I did some research and I got some books out and I read about the seals and I read about, why they make those sounds. And it was about, it was a mating call. And it was when they're trying to find a partner and the sounds. And it made me think about that. And I created this little piece of movement that became a dance film that I then shared in a dance on screen festivals. The other bit of research that I find that's really, really hugely inspiring are other artists working in other art forms. And this is an artist called Dan Harvey, and he was sculpting a lens out of ice. And he did this every day. Every day we found this, so we were docked in this place. He would go for about 5 days. He would literally carve and carve and carve. And that process of him making this every day, out in the cold, out on the ice, became a piece of art in itself. And that kind of sat with me for a long time when I was thinking about, designing a piece and this kind of very slow, beautiful process of letting something happen. And it wasn't immediate. It took a really long time. And I think some of this we got the young people to watch and to appreciate this as almost an arts residency, an arts kind of installation piece. So this is when I created that dance film. I then put it out onto the ice itself. That was quite hard to do because it was really cold. And I created a piece of movement that made me feel, it was my physiological, my body's response to being in somewhere really, really cold, what it felt like, how it felt for my body. And I created this. And this was also a part of another dance film that I created. So after I did all of these trips, I applied to be the artist in residence at the Environment Institute at the University College London, which is a big London university, and they do a lot of work around climate and sustainability. And during my 1 year that I was there, everybody I spoke to, all the scientists, all the sociologists, all the other people who were involved in that Environment Institute, everything turned around, all of my experience in the Arctic, all of those trips I'd been on, everything became about, in my head, all of that research about water. Everything went round and came back to this notion of water and our relationship with it. Whether it's about sea levels rising, whether it's about the lack of clean drinking water, whether it's how we respond, how we use water in our lives. So I did a lot of research around our relationship with water. And I went to India to do some research with a charity called Water Aid, and looked at how water and how, a lot of my research looked at women's relationship with water. They were the ones who went and walked 3-4 kilometers a day to collect water for their families. They're the ones who got money from funders and created toilets, public toilets that people could use. They're the ones who created, space for, to make sure that there was clean drinking water and facilities were made. And it was very much about women's relationship with water. So I made a piece of work, and this is that work called Elixir, and it is about our relationship with water. And if you can see from the picture right at the back is a science equipment, like a big, huge tube that starts with full of water, and we let it drip through the whole performance, and it drips into a bowl that is at the bottom. So it's about the kind of individual drops of water that kind of keeps going through the whole show. And then we projected onto the floor, and I worked with sound artists who recorded. So the image that you see on the floor is an image of a drop of water pouring into a black bucket, like a big bucket container. And it's just that drip, and they literally filmed that drip over a really long period of time. And that's what those projections are. So all the sounds in the piece is taken from water. All the projections are about water. There's science equipment at the back. And at the end of this piece, we use that water in those bowls to purify as a ritual, because every culture has a ritual that involves water. It's either purifying or cleansing. So that was a piece I made called Elixir that toured the UK, and we took the piece to Bulgaria as well, I think. So as you can see, like the everything as much as possible was about our cultural relationship. So this was about this idea that fish swim against the tide, like salmon swimming against the tide, this image that we had. And one of the things I realized when I was researching was that through dance, I can show our relationship with water. But what I couldn't show was the beauty that every single drop of water could have. And that I couldn't show through movement. So I then worked with a visual artist who created 10 little sculptures. I call them sort of water sculptures, to look at the beauty of water. So in this picture, there's a little teapot. It's a really, really old set of teapots. He created this little tube that allows the water to be sucked out of that teapot. The surface, the glass surface, is sprayed with a special chemical that makes all the water droplets collect together. And then it's at a slant like this, so the water can literally come down very, very slowly. And eventually that water droplet acts as a magnifying glass. And it magnifies the text underneath the glass so that you can read it. So you have to stand there and you have to wait for this water to slowly come down the surface. And then you have to wait, and then you have to read the text if you want to read the text. So it's about taking the time to appreciate every single drop of water. And this particular text is by Heraclitus. And I'm sure every culture has a similar saying, which is that you never stand in the same river twice, because that water is never coming back again. That water goes and you'll never feel that water, see that water, touch that water again. And for me, it was really important that we looked at water not just through the bodies and dance, but also in other ways that I couldn't do, which is when I brought in these various different collaborators to work with me. One day I went to a science festival and I watched a scientist, a surgeon, do a simulation about surgery, about operating theatres and how people get operated on. And I saw this and realized that it's really, really choreographic. It's like choreography around a table. When you see surgeons, anesthetists, the nurses, the doctors, they all move around the table. And to me, it felt like choreography. So I was inspired by watching this to make a piece of dance about surgery. Because when we go when people go into an operating theatre, you don't know what's happening to you because a lot of the time you're out, you're asleep. So I was really interested in what happens. So my research for this, I then was commissioned by the surgeon who was really interested in the relationship between dance, South Asian dance, that uses a lot of gestures. So there's a lot of hand gestures in Indian dance forms. And it's a bit like surgery when you put your hand out and the person will just put the instrument on your hand and then they start working and then you put your hand out again. The relationship, the kind of physical movement, it felt for me like a really good thing to make dance about. So this is a photo of two of my dancers who are in the piece practicing how to use surgical equipment for keyhole surgery. So the surgery where they make a hole and they go inside and there's a camera. So you can see the gestures. Like this is an Indian dance gesture. This is an Indian dance gesture. So each one of those things is a gesture that we work with our form. So this is my dancers. So you can see the girl with the lady with the t-shirt and the person holding the little camera. They're both dance artists and they're just practicing with, I think it was an animal heart, I think. And they were trying to look at how the movement is on a screen and the kind of movement that they were doing. And that was my research to go and create a work about surgery. I also spent 4 days in an operating theatre watching how the surgeons worked, how the person who gives you the anesthetic works, how the nurses work, so that I could understand how the movement was, what they did. So for example, I watched for a really long time how surgeons scrub up or wash their hands before surgery. So I watched, and we created a piece in the dance that's literally washing your hands before they go into surgery. Like, how do they put the robe? Because it's sterilized, you need to be really careful. Like, we created all of this into much bigger physical movements. So we created a piece of movement. So the dancers wear what the surgeons wear in the hospitals. As you can see, we made the little movements within surgery into something that was taken up by the whole of the body. So we really, and the surgeon would come into the studio with us. He would bring all the equipment. We got to use it. He was there to help talk about the kind of things we needed to think about. So it was very much about collaboration and having the scientists and the surgeons in the space with us when we create work. And that's really, for me as a dance artist, it's really important that that collaboration is there right from the start. Another piece of work that I created was as a result of me being a teacher in schools for over 20 years. I used to work a lot with young people who had mental health issues at school, problems with either it came from home, it came from a medical condition. And a lot of the work that I did at schools was very much about how can I support these young people? And this stayed with me for a long time. And also I dealt with a lot of young people who harmed themselves as a way of coping. And that stayed with me for a really, really long time. And in sort of late 2016, 2017, I made a piece about that was based around young people and mental health. That image that you see is inside a shipping container. And I don't know if I'm getting the translation of this, and I don't know if someone wants to help with that, but like a shipping containers are these big metal containers that people use on ships to transport equipment. So the piece was made inside 2 shipping containers. We opened them and we hung those lights. We had a screen, and it was like a visual arts installation. And every day that the shipping container was in a place, I would perform for half an hour, for 30 minutes, to bring the sound, the lights, the words together to create a piece. And it was really intimate in the sense that only 20, 25 people can sit inside the containers, and they're really close to you. So if I stretch my hand out, I could touch my audience. But it was the idea for the containers was that they look really normal, like everyday things on the outside, like we do, but nobody knows what's going on inside our heads because they're really complex places. You know, when you're struggling with mental health issues, it's a really complex situation in our heads. So for me, it was like walking into those containers and walking inside the complexity of somebody's brain. You know, you walk in, you see these lights, you see these sounds, you see this film, you see so many different things, but really carefully put together. And then you could walk out and then come back in and watch the show or the performance, which was half an hour. And this, I toured this work only to science festivals in this country. So for me, it was about trying to get the art to the science audiences and getting people to engage. So we did a lot of workshops with young people. I worked with a child psychiatrist to create this work. And I sat, and the research for that piece was I sat with him when he had his sessions, therapy sessions with young people. And that was really, really hard. You know, it was really hard because I have a kid myself, and listening to the kind of problems that young people have, how severe, how it affects whole families was the research. And I just sat quietly in a little corner of his room, and I just wrote lots and lots of things as much as I could. And that was what I then, you know, all of that information went into creating this whole installation. I've written a whole load of things down here that I found really useful as research. And this photo was taken when I did a residency in Sri Lanka for 6 weeks. And we were told, this person who organized the residency brought together 8 people and said, we've never met before. We come from different types of art forms. We had filmmakers, photographers, visual artists, sound artists, theatre makers. We all got together and we were told, live here, meet the people, understand the community, and in those 6 weeks, create something as a result of your experience of being in that space. So for me, those kind of residencies where you go and immerse yourself in a place, in a situation, within a culture, within a land, a bunch of people, that for me as an artist is one of the most important, inspiring, most affecting bits of research for me. And during those 6 weeks, I made work that I've never made before. I made a work about social political issues. I have never made work about social political issues because I've always concentrated on science, but actually you realize they're all connected. And because there was a massive civil war and human rights issues in Sri Lanka, I actually wanted to make something about, I'm from South India and a Tamil speaking Indian person in Sri Lanka. And it's the Tamil people, the people of my sort of Indian subcontinent part of India, that they wanted to remove from Sri Lanka. So I felt politically really uncomfortable. So I created a piece of work that was very much about being in that place and feeling very uncomfortable. And I made some film, which is why I've got this camera. I learned to make a dance film. I learned how to use video as a source, as a process. Podcasts, I listen to a lot of podcasts. I find them really interesting, sometimes as research, sometimes things that are not relevant. Collaborations are really important to me. Who you work with, people are the biggest source for me of research, the biggest source of knowledge. Sharing that practice is usually hugely inspiring when you put yourself in a room with a whole different bunch of people with different practices, you know, architects, economists, visual artists, dance artists. And when we all sit together, what you sometimes find is this sort of shared interest in wanting to say what we are passionate about. And I find that really inspiring. I work a lot with scientists. I find it's quite difficult sometimes And you have to find scientists who are interested in the arts and who get how we see the world of what they do. It's really important. I've talked about lived in experiences of being in a place, our lives, our experiences. That's hugely important research. We cannot forget that that's what sometimes makes us want to move and create work. And the big thing for me at the moment around climate and sustainability is our landscape, where we are, whether it's urban, whether it's rural, whether it's the ice tundra, whether it's, you know, the English countryside. That's really important too. And these are things that I find are really important when we think about methodologies and research when we make work. One of the pieces I created recently for Academy was a piece about plastics, and it was a piece for young children. So children and their parents and their families aged 7 and upwards. And it wasn't about plastic is bad, don't use it. It was the opposite. It was that how beautiful plastic is, some of the dangers that it can cause, but at the same time about how we shouldn't just think about recycling. For children, actually thinking about reusing is more important. So this is a piece I created with 3 dancers who work with Bharatanatyam. You can see the set. You know, we had a fishing net that we try to keep the piece as sustainable as possible. So we did a lot of research with scientists at UCL, material scientists, about plastics, the most effective ways to recycle, what children know. The set is made out of plastic bottles with lights inside them. There's a dustbin, which has a fan inside it that blows the plastic around. So that was a piece that toured in the UK, but again, born out of research around what kids think about plastic. So we did a lot of workshops in schools. We went to a lot of schools. And the most recent work that I've been doing is about climate migration. It's why people move because of climate change. And I went to India. I just came back 2 weeks ago to a place called the Sundarbans, where really severe weather patterns because of climate, cyclones, is making the island erode. The edges of the island are literally going underwater. They have mangroves, these big plants that used to be to help with floods, don't work anymore. Everything is just being broken apart. So this is what I saw when I went to the Sundarbans. So much of these houses were washed away. So this is the second time round these houses have been built. And people still want to live by the water because they are, a lot of them are fishermen. So they have to live by the water. And I went there to do the research to find out how people's lives have changed because their landscape has changed, how people's lives have changed because their houses have been washed away. And here are the flood defenses that were built. And each time they get washed away, they build them again. And they use a lot of bamboo structures. And a lot of the research for me is about working with the people in the community. So we did this really lovely workshop with a lot of young people. And for those young people, their houses were washed away in the last cyclone twice. One of those girls had her house washed away twice. One of those boys' primary school is gone because of the cyclones. So these are people who live this life and trying to understand from them what the shifts are. We did some workshops with them with these lovely little lanterns. They walked across the flood defenses. We talked about why we did this. And then I spent this week, so this Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, just this week, I was in studios in a big space researching this piece because it's an outdoor work. It will be outdoors, and it's about the audience being involved in the work. So the audience will carry these structures. It's like they are part of the migration of people. So it's an Indian dance piece set outdoors, which I'm making at the moment. And we're doing research with these structures, these bamboo structures, to look at what we can build that looks like bits of a home, bits of these flood defenses that people carry. And this is all the work that I've just been researching in this massive space near about an hour from where I live. And all of those images, talking to those communities, understanding the science. So I spoke to scientists who specialize in understanding the floods. to create some of these structures. And this is really very, very new research for me. I made this on Wednesday, and today is Friday. So literally 2 days ago, I was creating these structures in the studio based on the research that I did in India 2 weeks ago, all of that information. And the thing to say is it's quite hard as an artist when you've got all of this knowledge, you have all of this stuff that I've just learned from the people, from their lived in experiences, and I sometimes need to let it sit. So we're not making the work properly till a little bit later, but the structures is what I felt comfortable to start exploring now. You know, the idea of fishing nets. We saw a lot of nets everywhere. So some of those material you see here is bits of like nets that we found lying around in that space. So this is some of the areas of sort of research that I'm doing at the moment with the work around climate migration. So I'm now going to stop talking because I've talked to you for so long. What I thought would be really lovely is to ask you to, just based on what I've been talking about, is just to go away and think of something that is currently inspiring all of you. You know, what's inspiring you to make work? And it doesn't have to be an inspiration. It could be something that's making you feel like creating movement, because that's your practice. You know, it could be something you just did this morning. It could be making a cup of tea. You know, I've seen dance pieces about making cups of tea. It could be the landscape that you live in. It could be looking outside your window and seeing what's there. It could be a loss. It could be anything. It's something that you are thinking about at the moment that you think might make you want to go and create movement. And if there isn't anything, find something. Like I've just given you with this talk, a whole bunch of different things that made me go away and want to create work. You don't have to go very far from your home, really, from where you are, from where you're sitting. And then I want you to think about what information do you need to create the movement, the work, the art? Like what information about that thing that's inspiring you? Do you need to go and find out something? Like, you know, do you need to Google some information about where tea is? I'm just going to use making a cup of tea as an example because it's just really simple. You know, do you want to go and Google what's the best temperature the water should be at? Or is it that you want to think about where does the tea come from? Like, have you thought about maybe where these tea leaves come from? What is the stuff that you need? How could you go and get that information? Is it Google? Is it bringing your tea bag, your teacup, the hot water, putting it in front of you and looking at what happens, looking at the movement? You know, it could be anything like that. So, you know, how could you go and get that information? What resources do you need? Is it that you just need to go and speak to somebody? Like, just think through the stuff that you might need. And then also, you know, I was talking a lot about people who can help you. It could be that actually what you need is a musician, or you might need somebody who is a painter. You know, who are the people who could help you collaboratively? Maybe you want a scientist. Maybe you want a geologist to understand. So it's just a little process to think about what you might want to make work about, and just using all the things that I've shared with you about my research and methodologies. Sometimes it's some things that are really, really simple. And what would be great is if you wanted to just go away and spend, say, 7 or 8 minutes, just having a little think, doing the activity. And then if you'd like, and you'd be happy to maybe share with us, if any of you would be happy just to share your thoughts with us, that would be great. If you didn't want to, I invite you to write it on the chat if you want to, and just share, because it would just be really interesting to hear, because I feel like I've been talking so much about my influences. It would be really wonderful to hear from some of you what that might be and how you might research that. It's not about creating work, it's just about just having some time to think and process what I've said. So it's now 11:16. If we come back maybe at 11:25, and then we just have 5 minutes just to share. Is that good? Great. I will come back at 11:25. UK time.
Уточнюю українською. Нам зараз запропонували вам записати якісь ідеї, які мотивують вас, ну, прямо зараз, можливо, прямо сьогодні, можливо, сьогодні зранку, чи зараз, які мотивують вас для створення руху, чи для створення танцю. Це можуть бути як якісь найпростіші ідеї, такі як, наприклад, заварювання чаю зранку, чи якісь найскладніші, більш екзистенціальні ідеї, щось таке. Записати це зараз, і потім за бажанням можна поділитися цим в чаті, або останні 5 хвилин зустрічі розповісти про це. Таке зараз завдання.
Great. Should we come back just quickly to finish off and see if somebody shared their idea on chat. Thank you so much for sharing that. I like this idea of something that's appears in front of a subway, if I've read that correctly, and this idea of living some of the patriotic themes that are in the Ukraine now. And I imagine that is something that inspires a lot of you to create work, or it's the feeling of living through something that I imagine is hugely important and present in your lives. But it's also interesting to hear how that translates for you into something that wants you to make work. So this idea of doing something outdoors, something that does something that is improvised, and it's movement, it's universal. And I don't know if anybody wants to share anything with us. If you do, please do just unmute and just share if you'd like to. Or if not, if you have even just a few words that you want to share in the chat about, even if it's things that are inspiring you to make work, or any thoughts you have about what you might want to do, would be really lovely to hear. I'll just give people a few moments to have a think if you want to share anything, or if you want to put anything on chat. If any of it needs
AI maybe?
on, yeah.
I have one idea. I'm just thinking about it some days, and actually birds are inspiring me. And the only what I now think is efficient in the situation is to observe their flight or walking on Earth. Also, maybe to look at YouTube different ways of flying, or flight in, I mean, in Zoom version, when their flight is close, because I can't observe it being on Earth. And also, I'm not sure that it will work, but maybe to ask an ornithologist, yeah, about differences in flight and behavior and looking for food, because now I'm interested also in difference, how to dance differently a crown, and I don't know exactly how it is in English, this kaku or gauk. I mean, such small bird, another type of bird that краде яйця, я не знаю how it is in English. Could you help me, someone? Just a moment, I will translate.
Tall legs, maybe.
Steals an eggs. Sorry. So crown, dove, and gauk.
Oh. Okay. And these are types of birds.
Yeah. That's what I.
Great, but also just to, so for example, I work with a sound artist whose specialism is birds. She's fascinated by birds. So she will go and record the sounds of, she told me once she was sitting in a countryside in the UK, listening to 1 million wings take off. You know, she literally records and sits and watches and creates these beautiful things. So actually, this idea around birds, you could bring so many different other expertise in there that allows you to explore, you know, this notion of, I mean, it's really amazing. There's so much stuff out there that will allow you to create the thing. So, and sometimes the inspiration can come from the sound, the recorded stuff. So yeah, great. Thank you for sharing that. Really, really interesting. But I love the way you talked about trying to identify someone to help you to understand what they eat, what they do, but just identifying what you need is such a big, important task. So thank you. We have another person who shared here. I'm worried and interested how the body, national identity, war and politics, ecological situation, children and their future. Absolutely. Sometimes it's a lot of stuff that inspires us, and the hardest thing sometimes is to maybe find a thing that is the most emotionally provoking thing for you out of a list of lots of stuff. And I imagine that for a lot of you, where you are, what you're going through has a lot of that, but it's finding, yeah, it's sitting. Sometimes it needs you to sit with things and think before you can identify all those questions that I've asked you as well. Is there anybody else who wants to share anything?
Maybe I?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm really sorry for not turning on the camera. The lights are off, but I hope you can hear me.
Yep, we can hear you.
Currently, it's very difficult for me to move due to the circumstance in Ukraine, but life goes on. Personally, I am inspired to create movement by my students whom I teach dance. They inspire me to dance, to my work, and I'm very grateful to them. I don't need a lot of information. I'm just always inspired and I can just turn on music and the process goes on. But if in my life I receive some information, I eagerly take it. And why do I create? Because I have many goals, but I often get information from other teachers at workshops and masterclasses, and it's very important and interesting for me. The resources I need to create are movement, motivation and energy. Well, in this process, my like-minded people, students, and of course my mentors help me. Thank you.
That's really wonderful to hear, because actually what's really beautiful about what you said is the body is an inspiration in itself. The body, the way we move, the people we move with. You know, the fact that you can go into a room, put the music on, and your students dance, they inspire you to move in itself is such a massive inspiration. That in itself is the most important bit of research you can do and be a part of. So that's really beautiful to hear that that's what's inspiring you and just moving. And sometimes, you know, people talk a lot about our bodies and our body memories, what sits with our bodies when we move. We don't just like sometimes we don't just move, we move because we're a result of all the things that we are. You know, we are the biggest bit of research to ourselves. So it's just really wonderful to hear that, and to hear that your students inspire you. That's really heartwarming to hear. So thank you for sharing that with us. There's something else on chat. Thank you so much for your knowledge and experience. Yeah, thank you. I know that I've gone over time. Unless anybody wants to share anything, I should really finish because I know I've got an hour. And I just wanted to say thank you to everybody who shared stuff with us at the end. I know I didn't give you much time to think. And I hope that you can go away and just, if there's nothing else, I hope I've just given you various things to think about. And that's the most important thing. I hope you can all make work. I hope you can all move, and I hope you find joy in moving and the joy of moving with people around you. Thank you.